Well, hello YouTube-verse, it's Max of Fun with Guns. Today I thought we would talk about some of the iconic Hollywood guns. Now of course these are by no means going to be all the guns that are iconic in Hollywood, just some of them that we're all familiar with. It's kind of fun to talk about. Now of course probably the most iconic general purpose firearm is the Cowboy 6-shooter. And the Cowboy 6-shooters that most of us can remember when you mention a character are, of course, drum roll, the Lone Ranger's silver peacemakers with the ivory grips, and of course his famous silver bullet. The Lone Ranger's 6-shooters were about as much a part of Lone Ranger lore as the mask was. I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to say, in a way, they were their own characters. There was the Lone Ranger, Tonto, his horse Silver, the silver bullet, and of course his nickel-plated 45 peacemakers. As long as we're talking about peacemakers and cowboy guns, of course, there's John Wayne, the Duke, and his yellow-handled peacemaker that he carried in a lot of his movies. Although by no means his only pistol, it was definitely an iconic one. It gave a familiar feel to a lot of his movies, and thereby, in a way, was its own character. Of course, still dealing with the cowboy guns, there's Clint Eastwood. You can't forget the Man with No Name and the silver snake-gripped first 1851 Colt Navy, followed by the Colt 45 Peacemaker. In fact, I believe Clint still keeps the 1851 as a talisman to this day. And speaking of Clint, of course, he probably gave rise to one of the most iconic firearms in the history of Hollywood. And we all know where I'm going with this one. The Dirty Harry Smith & Wesson Model 2944 Magnum. The gun essentially was a character in the show. The gun was his co-star. Of course, he wasn't the only one in the Dirty Harry series to carry interesting guns that were highly identified with the character. In the second Dirty Harry movie, Magnum Force, one of his co-stars, one of the villains of the show, played by David Soul, carried a Colt Python. In fact, I believe his entire little entourage of assassin motorcycle cops carried Pythons. Python was also carried by his co-star in the third Dirty Harry movie, The Enforcer, when Tyne Daly carried a short-barreled model. And speaking of David Soul and the Python, Soul would later land the role in Starsky and Hutch as one of the two lead characters, and his character in that show carried a 6-inch Python. And as long as we're talking about movie pythons that have become iconic in television, right now on The Walking Dead, Rick Grimes has repopularized these Python 6-inch, especially in stainless steel. In fact, thanks to the popularity of that show, nickel pythons are now well in excess of $3,000 on Gunbroker. The irony is, a 6-shot revolver is not the gun I would really want if I was fighting off hordes of zombies. And while we're talking about iconic pythons, of course, don't forget the one that was carried by Robert Blake in Electra Glide in blue. That was the rare Pinto model that had the chromed or stainless barrel and cylinder, but the blued frame. Of course, there are other traditional Hollywood guns that have become characters in their own rights. The Tommy gun is a staple of the gangster flick, used by everyone from Tom Hanks in Road to Perdition to Robert Stack as Elliot Ness in The Untouchables, and in the Untouchables movie as well. You pretty much can't have a 1930s gangster flick without a Tommy gun. And of course, Tom Hanks also carried a Thompson in Saving Private Ryan. Yep, Hollywood loves its Tommy guns. Of course, if you're going to talk about guns that are people's friends, you can't forget to say hello to my little friend, the M203 grenade launcher on the M16 in Scarface. The M203, which is what I carried in the Army, is also the same thing that Arnold carried in Predator. So Arnie and I have something in common. Speaking of Arnold, let's not forget the minigun that Jesse Ventura carried in Predator. Okay, that gun was just badass and awesome. I don't care if it wasn't real, it was badass and awesome. It was awesomery, awesome, 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 awesome. By the way, as a side note, the one carried in Scarface was actually a mock-up 37mm. There were no 40mm M203s available, so the Hollywood props people made a look-alike. Some television characters, even on popular shows today, have carried the same firearm for the duration of the show. An example is Supernatural, where Dean Winchester is carried his engraved and nickeled .45 automatic, and his brother Sam is carried his Taurus 9mm with the white grips. That adds a certain continuity to the show, and in a way makes the guns characters themselves. In fact, they have numerous episodes dedicated to an 1836 Colt Paterson that's simply referred to as the Colt because of its magical qualities in the show. And of course, science fiction has given us a fair number of mythical firearms that are still pretty interesting. The blaster that Harrison Ford used in Blade Runner, and of course the blaster that he used in Star Wars, which was made from a modified Mauser. However, as neat as the gun was, we all know it had its limitations. Another interesting firearm that became an icon of Hollywood was the Colonial Blaster from the popular television show Battlestar Galactica, the original. In the later version, they carried regular conventional firearms. But when you get right down to iconic firearms from sci-fi, nothing beats the original series Star Trek Phaser. I'm sorry, it is just the coolest ray gun ever made. And I'm including both the hand phaser and the pistol phaser. The fact that they were adjunct to one another was an interesting concept in Roddenberry's work. And of course, we can't forget interesting bad guy guns. No one beats a Klingon disruptor for just looking really Klingon. Of course, speaking of sci-fi weapons, there was also the rather interesting and utilitarian Sandman gun from Logan's Run. Not the greatest movie ever made, but an interesting weapon. Of course, Hollywood has other stalwart firearms they love to use because Hollywood does love its automatic weapons. Probably amongst these, the most iconic would be the .50 caliber machine gun. It's been used in everything from Memphis Belle to Rambo and just about every other kind of military movie you can think of, both ones that are supposed to be accurate and ones that are somewhat more popcorn. Let's face it, the Ma Deuce is just as good as it gets, and Hollywood does love its big belt-fed machine guns. Of course, that's not to diminish the popularity of the M60 machine gun that Hollywood does love so much, because it was used by everybody, including Rambo. Of course, the M16 and the AK-47 are both iconic weapons of Hollywood because they're iconic weapons in the real world, going all the way back to Vietnam and of course even up to today. So you pretty much can't have a terrorist that doesn't carry an AK-47. Hollywood's first popularization of the AK-47 came about from the movie Red Dawn, the one with Patrick Swayze, the good one. And that made the gun so iconic that it's become as much a part of the American lexicon as the AR-15. Well, that pretty much sums up my short list. We could be here all day talking about this. So why don't you put down some of your favorite iconic Hollywood guns in the comment section below. I'm Max from Fun with Guns. We'll see you guys next time. Ciao. Oh, and be safe.